Welcome to No Rares Required Episode 42, Orzhov Tokens. I went back and forth on whether to include my theoretical best draft skeleton or my more realistic draft skeleton, and I decided to go towards theory, because I think it highlights what you should try to aim for. In reality, unless black is completely open at the start of a throwback event, you'll have to include more white. But black should be your primary focus because it is the better color. My formula to success in Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth is get at least 7 cards that trigger Ring Tempt. As long as the game doesn't end by turn 5 or 6, the value off looting is too good, and it makes all of your 1/1s, whether they be from Protector of Gondor, or Gothmog, or on a Dunlin Crebain itself, a level 4 ring emblem makes every creature into a lethal threat. This skeleton has 4 cards that are white, and as we explore the archetype further, you'll see that there are more white options, but I'll emphasize again, black is what you want to be the majority of your deck. The archetype is lacking good 2-drops, so you'll want to prioritize Easterling Vanguard or its replacement Mortar Muster a little more highly than you normally would, and you may end up with a very large Icicle on 3. My first whack at the draft skeleton, for example, had 11 3-drops that I wanted to play, and the majority of your best cards are at cost 3. And my last note for the archetype is, compared to the archetype's win rate on 17 lands, the archetype is underdrafted as we near the end of the set. With that said, let's explore the best cards in Orzhov, discuss some more realistic options of what to include in white, and hopefully overrun our opponents with the power of ring-bearing 1/1 tokens. First up, to no one's surprise, is Claim the Precious. Removal and a Ring Tempt all in one card. Personally, it's not at the pack one pick one level, but I wouldn't blame you if you did. The downside is if black ends up getting cut during the draft, then the double pip black can be cumbersome. At this point, I feel like I've covered the good black cards so much that it's difficult to figure out what more to say. A 1/1 flyer that makes an excellent ring bearer that also makes a 2/2 is definitely a card you want, so pick up Dunlin Crebain. Like Claim, I also don't pick these up as a pack one pick one, since I tend to let the uncommons guide me in this set. But if you're dead set on playing black, then go for pack one pick one on Dunlin Crebain. Torment of Golem's worst archetype is Orzhov, but I still like to play 1 or 2. I'm aiming to go wide in this archetype, and the likelihood of already having an army in play by turn 4 is pretty high. I'm not aiming to play any of the payoffs of cards that benefit off my army's power, and I have no way of ramping to this on turn 3 like I do in Dimir or in Golgari. Still, the ceiling is too high when this card does snag their best card in hand and creates a 2/2, that I can't help but play it, especially since I feel like it's underdrafted. And good old Shelob's Ambush. My favorite archetype for this is still Rakdos, but in Orzhov you can trade a 1/1 into their biggest threat. Your 1/1, now a 2/3, is still likely to die, so it ends up being 1.5 cards to remove their threat. But just for 1 mana, that's a pretty good deal, and you get a food token, which can matter if you have something like Rosie in play. I promise I'll get to the white cards soon, but especially at the common level, black reigns supreme. Uruk-hai Berserker is a key common for getting to the 7 ring temps. If you've fallen short, you really don't want to play this if you don't have enough ring temps. And alright, we made it to white. Your best white common is Protector of Gondor. A 3/3 that spawns a 1/1 token is great for a deck that is aiming to make those 1/1 tokens into lethal threats. I still think its best archetypes are Boros and Azorius. Even though its win rate on 17 lands is highest in Orzhov, I think it's just inflated by black's win rate. It's still a card that goes pretty late, around pick 7 or 8, and has great synergies in Orzhov. Errand Rider of Gondor tends to get picked up earlier, around pick 5 or 6, but it's still a great inclusion. It gets better the more ring temps that you have, since it turns the triggered loot into a card draw. And my last white common that I look for is East Farthing Farmer. This is more dependent on other cards in the deck, like Rosie and Bill at uncommon, but you can do some wonderful things with Slip on the Ring if you end up with a bunch of these. I like to look for them on the wheel or pick 9 and onward. Sam's Desperate Rescue is a raised dead with a ring tempt. One of the reasons I end up in Orzhov over other archetypes is Denethor at uncommon. It's nice to have an option to bring him back if he dies from your opponent's removal. And since with Denethor, I have a pretty good reason to play Sam's Desperate Rescue, playing Trolls is always an appealing option. Being able to cycle this for a swamp and then bring it back when I get to 6 mana is a nice synergy. Also, since the majority of your power costs 3, I found myself capping out at 4 cost cards in this archetype, and would play this as a 17th land, even with 7+ ring temps, especially if I have Sam's Desperate Rescue. I like Easterling Vanguard more in Dimir, where I plan to use it to block for 2 turns. In Orzhov, it has the problem of being a +1/+1 if you have an army in play, but the archetype is weak in 2-drops. I'm completely uninterested in playing Took Reaper, Westfold Rider, or Eastmark Cavalier unless I absolutely have to. The 2-drops in white are just not that great, so I usually aim to pick up 2 copies of Vanguard if I can. And a wonderful synergy in Orzhov is sacrificing 1/1s, and nothing does it better than Haunt of the Dead Marshes, especially when you have ring temps to ensure you always have a legendary creature. Whether you are sacrificing this to Denethor, or to Golem, or even just making it a ring bearer, I've enjoyed having 1 or 2 haunts in Orzhov. And the alternative 2-drop if you can't find Vanguard is Mordor Muster. You'd much rather have a body, since, like Torment, you don't really want to go tall on your Orc army, and unless you're splashing blue for Mouth of Sauron, you don't really care about the number of spells in your graveyard. Now for the uncommons. The mythic level and totally take pack 1 pick 1 uncommon for Orzhov is Nazgul. It's a ring tempt, it's a 2/3 death touch, and it gets bigger each time you ring tempt. The one thing to note, and I've said it in my other guides and I'll say it again, don't underestimate missing a loot to make this your ring bearer. As long as it is, your opponent has to trade 2 for 1 outside of removal. And now for the reason I end up in Orzhov, Shadow Summoning. This is one of the best turn 2 plays. The set doesn't have many answers for hitting for 2 in the air on turn 3. There's Kerbane, but Shelob's Ambush takes care of that, and if they do manage to gum up the air, the 1/1 tokens make great ring bearers, and it tends to go late for an uncommon, around pick 4 or 5. Golem is a great reoccurring ring tempt. I like it most in Rakdos, where you can benefit off the aggression of playing a 3/1 on turn 2, then clearing the way with removal on turn 3, or use it to sacrifice something you've stolen with Grishnak. But in Orzhov, its benefit is winning through attrition. It's a combo with Haunt or 1/1s off of Denethor, and helps ensure that you always have a level 4 ring bearer. Gothmog's best archetype is Orzhov. It's great just as a 3/3 that spawns a 1/1 Death Touch, but giving all your 1/1 tokens off Protector of Gondor or Shadow Summoning puts it over the top. Just keep in mind that if your opponent uses instant speed removal, your 1/1 might suddenly find itself very dead. Golem's Bite, like Claim, is removal and a ring tempt in 1 card. I'm not aiming to push early damage like I might in Rakdos, but Golem's Bite is always an easy inclusion. Voracious Felbeast deserves a nod. My curve is usually aiming to be a little lower than where a 6-drop fits comfortably, since outside of splashing, there isn't a single 5-drop that I aim to play in Orzhov. Still, sometimes you pick it up early going for Rakdos, where it's a mythic level uncommon, and it's certainly not something you cut once you have it. Denethor, sweet old man in a chair. This card is a win condition all by itself. Being able to sacrifice a 1/1 token, sap for 1, and then the 1/1 replaces itself at end of turn is just so good. And it makes Golem better, since you can sacrifice a token and get the token back for free. Some interesting splashes that are worth a mention if you picked up multiple copies of Great Halls are Frodo Baggins. You aren't aiming to go all in on legendary synergies, but it triggers a ring tempt even if it's your only legendary, and using Shelob's Ambush to manipulate what has to block Frodo while giving it Death Touch can be an absolutely back-breaking situation for your opponent. And another splash, and one that I think often gets overlooked, is Shadowfax. Most of your deck, or sometimes your entire list of creatures, are under 4 power. Eagles of the North is your best thing to hit, not a card I usually like to play in Orzhov, but with Shadowfax the synergy is amazing. But outside of Eagles, the majority of your creatures have good ETBs at low power, and playing a creature for free can easily win by going wide. Reprieve is worth a mention. It's better the more aggressive that you are, and a turn 2 Shadow Summoning is one of the most aggressive plays in the set, especially if you can time walk them when they play their Kerbane on turn 3. Samwise, the Stout-Hearted is a ring tempt that can also be used to bring back your Denethor if your opponent found an answer. You can also use Sam's Desperate Rescue to bring back Sam, so you can do it all over again. And originally I had thought that Rosie, Cotton of Southlane was going to be best in the token archetype of Orzhov. Turns out I actually like her most in Celestia Food or Legendaries. The level 4 ring emblem is easier to hit in Orzhov because of black, and a 1/1 ring bearer doesn't need or even want the +1/+1. Still, putting the +1/+1 on Kerbane or Shadow Summoning can push a lot of pressure in the air, and Orzhov is her second best archetype, so she's a welcome inclusion. Bill the Pony is one of the best ring bearers in the game. Being able to even just threaten becoming a 4/4 is great, and it allows you to make the same threat with Denethor. I don't usually have a bunch of food synergies in this archetype, but I haven't found it to be necessary. And my last uncommon worth a mention is Bitter Downfall. I think Orzhov is its worst archetype since 1, you're going wide, so removal isn't as necessary as it would be in aggro or control. 2, you can win through ring bearers or sapping them with Denethor, so you don't even need it for pushing damage. And then 3, if Bitter Downfall is just reserved for a must-answer bomb, then Claim the Precious is just superior since I'm mostly black anyway. You can still use it to remove something that took damage from the free attack of a 1/1 that will just get replaced again at end of turn when you have Denethor, which is a fun little synergy, and let's be honest, removal is always welcome. And now for the rares, and there is but one that stands out for Orzhov. Orcish Bowmasters and Horn of Gondor are great and go in every black deck, but Call of the Ring performs above average in Orzhov. It's a good way to ensure that you always have the level 4 ring bearer to make your 1/1 tokens into lethal threats, and you can get some life gain off of food tokens from Bill or Farmer, so don't hesitate to draw those cards. And for the Mythic, there's always Witch King of Angmar, Andoril, Flame of the West, and Palantir of Orthanc, which go in every black deck. But Orzhov is playing white, so keep your eyes open for splashing Arwen, Mortal Queen. Giving a flyer like Dunlin Kerbane or Shadow Summonings a +1/+1, as well as a permanent lifelink counter, can just win you the game. That's it for my thoughts on Orzhov. I have one last archetype to cover, Azorius, and then it will be time for Wilds of Eldraine, coming to Arena on September 5th. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope this guide helps you get trophies and draft infinitely. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below or reach out to me on Discord. The link is in the video description below. I'll be back in 1 week for the next episode of No Rares Required.